Good day, everyone, and welcome back. We said we were going to cover the definition of personal finance, right? And talk about how personal finance as an area can be used to improve our financial performance in the personal areas of our life, which would be individual at the individual level and at the household level. Now let's begin with the definition. Now we have about four definitions here, right? There's a simple definition right at the top, and then there are um more extensive definitions, about three other extensive definitions. So let's begin with extensive definition number one. Personal finance is a field of study. Now, this is considering finance as a field, as an academic field or a practice area concerned with how individuals and households can be able to earn, manage, save, and invest, including spend their money over time, taking into account risk and their goals. So there are two things you want to know in personal finance: risk and goals. So you manage towards goals, you manage against risk, right? All right. So we want to achieve our goals. We want to manage, we want to do that in spite of what? Financial risk. Now, you could look at personal finance as how we study, practice, and improve our financial behaviors. In other words, our financial activities might be better. In other words, how we earn, how we manage, how we save, how we invest, and how we spend our money. Now, the second definition looks at it in the form of an application. So whether you studied or you practice, there are financial principles, right? And this doesn't necessarily mean you are applying the right principles. It's just understanding that there are principles that govern how we make monetary decisions, right? Things like budgeting, savings, planning, investing, insurance, retirement planning, estate planning, the principles around which we take these monetary decisions can be also be seen as what? Financial planning. And then the third one is going to be the process of planning. All right. So this is seen personal finance as a process, right? The process or how we go about planning and managing our personal financial activities from our inflows, which is income generation, to our outflows which will be income consumption or financial consumption, to investments like asset accumulation. Again, we must always consider how we protect ourselves from financial risk to be able to secure ourselves financially and achieve our life goals and objectives. These are financial. So, in summary, before we go to the last one, we're looking at how we can assure ourselves of good financial income, good, worthy, and steady financial inflows, how we can be able to properly utilize using tools like planning and budgeting, how we can spend properly, how we can assess our effectiveness in spending and investing and saving, meaning at some point you should be able to look through your finances and say, okay, I did this correctly and I did not do this very, very well. Now, how do you invest? How do you save? Right? How do you plan? How do you execute? Right? How do we invest and save, right? What are the tools and what are the information? What are the knowledge? What are the resources? What are the advisory that we use in what making these decisions? Now, all of this, at what point do we buy a car? Do we need it now? At what point do we buy a house? What is the rationale behind our making these purchases? And how do they affect our assets base? How do they affect our expense base, our expense structure? And how do they improve? Do they generate returns or do they drain our finances in the form of expenses and taxes? All of this should be taken into consideration and should fit into the larger framework. And that brings us to our final definition, which is right at the top. Where personal finance is about how we plan, use, protect, and grow our money. Throughout our lifetime, generally, the approach is the earlier you start your financial planning and management, the better for you. How do you plan, use, protect, and grow your money through your lifetime to be able to meet both your personal and household or family goals? Moving on. Next, we'll look, consider the objectives of financial planning. Why is it even a thing? Why do we do financial planning? Why do we invest our time? Why do we invest our resources? Why do we pursue knowledge in financial planning? A couple of very good reasons. Number one, income management. Use financial planning to ensure that you earn the right income. It is a stable, flowing income. So generally, it's financial planning that tells you, okay, it's very good to have a salary, but you also should have what? Alternative sources of income. Most of us hear things like multiple streams of income, right? The goal of this is to maximize your earning potential over a lifetime and ensure that you can be able to use your skills and your ability to earn, right? Of course, for what we call idle passive income generation, yes, we want to make sure that it's in alignment with our risk tolerance. And we're going to come to that, which is where we talk about things like the purchase of shares and and financial instruments, financial assets. The second key objective is we want to be able to know how to control our cash flow control. Now, it's a very, very terrible situation if every time we get money, we just go and we spend it on, we splurge, we spend it on based on our impulse. We're very reactive without any priorities. Because what budgeting begins with is that ensuring that you prioritize, right? So yes, we want to balance income with expenses, right? Ensuring that we understand our priorities and we properly rank um our needs against our wants, right? We don't want to handle our expenses or meet our financial requirements from debt, right? Or find ourselves often in deficit where we have overspent. And now we need to look for other ways to be able to cover our financial requirements. No, that's not good, right? Another good thing about budget is that you have it written down and planned on paper on spreadsheets, and it allows you to be able to evaluate. It gives you visibility, allows you to be able to evaluate your financial performance and what reinforce discipline in your spending. Another objective is what? Savings and liquidity. Now we're going to come to the three reasons why we hold money, but there's what you call emergency funds. It handles what you call precaution. It handles money, holding money for the precautionary. You want to build emergency funds for unexpected events. You want to make sure that in the short term, you can meet your day-to-day needs, right? So there are certain things that are fundamentals, things like what you eat, things like your transportation, things like things like what you need, what you eat, things like your transportation. These are fundamental. These are basic things like your house rent from month to month. These are basic, right? You want to make sure that there is short-term liquidity to be able to meet these needs. Energy consumption, right? Reduce your dependence on debt for shock. How? Make sure that you have what? Emergency funds so that anything happens, right? You have where to go to pull funds. Apart from that, you also want to invest, right? It is not enough to maintain the same level of income indefinitely. You want to make sure that your wealth grows with time, right? So how do you invest and how do you get your wealth, your net worth, so to speak, to grow? What will be the rate of return on your investments? Do they come in one stream or do they compound? What are the sacrifices? What sacrifices do you need to make for your wealth to compound? Because of course, it's going to be a sacrifice. The sacrifices, are you going to consume now or are you going to defer your consumption so that money gets to work on your behalf and compounds or grow? So how do you harness compounding through the time value of money, which we're going to treat also. And again, we have what? Risk management. Now, it is very possible to lose the ability to earn or even lose your assets, for instance, your principal. Losing ability to earn can come from things like being sacked, being sick, death, disability, right? That can of course, wipe out one's ability to earn. Do we have a way to protect ourselves from this risk? Right. There is also the risk that we can lose our capital in investments. Do we have things like insurance? Of course, it's not just insurance. We begin with knowledge, knowing what you invest in before you talk about things like insurance and diversification. So basically, three major tools is knowledge. Knowledge is your first tool. Know what you're investing in, know how to protect yourself. Secondly is what? Diversification, right? Diversify your investment. And then third is what? Use insurance to be able to what? Reduce your exposure, right? And then the goal of this is to preserve your financial stability in uncertainty. If you lose your source of income, you should be able to have alternatives. If sickness or illness or certain things happen, then you should be able to um ride this wave. You want to be able to build a resilient financial system that will not react to changes in your life conditions, that would not be thrown off by uncertainty. There's this statement that people make in Nigeria, say generally Nigerians earn so little that they are one illness away from going broke. We don't want that to be our situation. Even if that might be the norm because of the economic conditions of a lot of Nigerians, we want to think above the average and make sure that we stay prepared, right? So we want to preserve financial stability even in periods of uncertainty. We want to be able to manage debt. Use debt responsibly and strategically. You don't use debt to buy bags, shoes, fancy glasses, designers, cars. It's not very smart. If we must use debt, you want to make sure that we use debt to acquire assets that would give us a rate of return that is higher than the interest on the debt. We want to ensure that we avoid high cost, which is high interest debts, and debts that are not going to be productive. We just invest in an asset that will decline and depreciate and not give us any value. We also want to make sure that when we collect debt, we maintain our credit worthiness by making sure that we pay the right amount at the right time and we maintain the right relationship with our credit institutions, right? And then another goal is what? Financial independence. We want to reduce reliance on what? Active income. Now, active income is the income that you get from having to go to work every day. Well, that's great. But then again, if you are not active, then that stream of income dries up. You want to be able to build a passive income, things like what? Investing in financial instruments, real estate, um, well, books are semi-passive. So if you have royalties on books, it's passive, but it's active in the sense that you have to write a book, you have to market a book for it to get to that point where it begins to generate income streams for you. So it's semi-passive, and then you have passive income, which is sitting down, and then you use your bamboo or your trove or whatever instruments you have, the brokerage instruments, to be able to purchase shares, achieve freedom of what? Financial choice. Another objective of financial planning is to ensure that we plan out our retirement years, right? We likely will not be available, work might not be available to us at the ages of 60, 70, or we may not even have the energy if that work was available. So you want to make sure that in our earning during our active years, that we make provisions for the later years of our lives, right? After active working years, we want to make sure that we can still have what? Sustainable income to be able to maintain the right living standard even in retirement, right? We want to make sure that whatever tools are protected against inflation risk and what? Have low inflation risk and also other kinds of risk, right? The risk of what? Capital loss. For instance, if you are doing your investment planning, right, you want to invest in low risk vehicles. You can't afford to invest in things like put your money in things like forex, right? You begin to get older. You can't start investing in heavily in things like shares and things like forex and things like in a very high risk um investments. You want to invest in higher risk instrument at the younger stage of your life and balance your portfolio with things that are low risk, and then move into more low risk investments as you begin to move upwards in age. Another very good reason or another very good objective of financial planning is tax efficiency, right? It's what you call tax avoidance, which is minimizing your tax liabilities legally. A lot of times, if you look at the Nigerian tax laws, right, things like there is an initial limit that is not taxable. There will also be things like things that can be deducted from taxes, like your 25 from your income, like the 25% relief on housing, 25% relief on housing up to the amount of 500,000. Your insurance fund and your national housing insurance scheme, and all of these are all tools you can use to minimize your tax liabilities. It's very important that we understand and we take them. It's also very important that we what? File our tax returns, right? Optimize your after-tax income and returns, and then structure your finances in a tax-aware manner. Very important. Structure your finances properly in a way that would what? Keep you away from paying or from excess exposure to taxation. Make sure that you file your annual returns, right? File your annual returns at the end of the period. Do it responsibly. It's never good for the government to come chasing you at the end of the period to do your filing. It's never good. And a lot of times it can result in consequences that are terribly bad for you as an economic agent, right? And then again, we have estate and legacy planning, right? In the event of um passing on, right? Being called to the great beyond. You want to make sure that there is an orderly transfer of wealth and that provisions are made for our heirs and our dependents, and that these things happen in a way that there is no fight, fracas, conflicts, and destruction of our legacy after we pass on, right? So you don't want disputes, you don't want delays, you want to minimize again estate taxes, right? So yes, all this planning has to happen so that in the event of demise, and in the event that our life, our time on earth ends, then the transfer of our wealth can be very orderly and doesn't create conflicts. There's not much lost in the process. It's not inefficient, so to speak. Another very important aspect of personal finances that it helps us achieve our goals. We want to be able to know our life goals. Our goals might also be things like having an education. We want to have an education. We want to set up a future for our children. We want to be able to travel the world, see things, invest in businesses, right? Yes, we need to first of all figure out our goals and make sure that these goals are fitting or appropriate for our time horizon, where we are now, and how long do we have to achieve these goals. And then we want to what convert our financial resources, our money into what money should help us achieve the kind of life we want. So make sure that our financial resources help us achieve our life outcome. And then finally, security and peace of mind. If you're in debt, you're not secure, you do not have peace of mind. If your expenses always overrun your income, you're not secure, you do not have peace of mind. If you're being pursued by tax agents and government regulation every time, you're not secure, you don't have peace of mind. You want to make sure that with proper planning and management, you can reduce your stress and uncertainty, you can have confidence in your future and in the quality of your financial decision making, and then extensively you can what have what good financial well-being and financial stability. Now, a very fundamental aspect in financial planning and management be a consideration of why we hold money. Now, John Maynard Keynes, or called the father of macroeconomics, J.M. Keynes, um, the economists already know this guy, the guy that brought us fiscal policies, use of taxation, and tax policies and government spending to be able to recover from recessions. And that's John Maynard Keynes. He posited that there are three reasons why we hold money, and this has established the foundation of what we call personal financial management. Number one is for transactional reason. It calls it the transactional motive. And a lot of times we know this because this is one of the major reasons why every day we hold money. So look at this day-to-day expenses, the timing gap between income and spending, right? So yes, we would need to spend daily on what we need. We need to spend daily on our needs, our wants. We need to buy food. We need to pay our bills. We need to spend on transportation. We need to make sure that the house is lighted, energy bills, utility, right? Day to day education. These are all transactional. A lot of times, transactional motive will hold the bulk of our income. So it's very important, and I'm going to want you to create a list of all your income and everything you spend on in a day over a period of a month. And then I want you to identify your transactional, which is your day-to-day expenses, right? And then the second reason why we hold money would be for precautionary reasons. Now, there are things that can happen that are what uncertainties or risk. You want to make sure that you're protecting yourself against risk. You want to make sure that there is some money, emergency funds, that put together to handle unexpected expenses, things like sickness, things like loss of income, loss of the ability to earn, things like losing a job, things like losing some portions of one's business, or God forbid, these are not very good. But you want to make sure that you have money together to be able to go through, to be able, for instance, in 2023, a lot of people's financial earning power was affected by very simple changes in policies, right? So things like there were certain policy changes that increased the rate of the dollar to the naira significantly and also raised the price of fuel. What did that do? That was an uncertainty that pushed a lot of people, right, um into states of what? Not having enough, right? You want to provide financial security against uncertainty. So things like sudden repairs, something got spoiled, medical bills, and job losses are not things that we expect. We might expect them, there are uncertainties, right? You want to hold money for precautionary reasons. And then finally, speculative reasons, investment and opportunities. You want to start a business, you want to buy assets when the prices are down, buying the dip in the stock market. You want to start a business, is a business you think that is going to what? Generate some kind of returns, right? You want to hold cash or hold money to be able to take advantage of what investment opportunity, right? And to remain flexible in uncertain market conditions. And that leads us to the last part, which is going to be the areas that are covered by financial planning. So what are the areas of financial planning, right? It's very important that we cover these and see how we can be able to treat this, at least in our personal lives and in our business lives, one after the other. We have financial goal setting. So what are your financial goals? How much money do you want to have? What kind of wealth do you want to build, right? What timing do you want to achieve this? Do you want your wealth to be denominated in naira, dollars, what currency, right? What are your life goals and what will be the amount of money you need to achieve it? Can you define it in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term? It's very, very important. This would be your compass. This would be your rudder. This would be your anchor, and it's the starting point for every kind of financial management. Sorry, this is supposed to be areas that financial management, not financial planning, right? So this adjusted to financial management of personal finance, sorry, areas that personal finance covers, areas covered by personal finance. Now, another very important area is income and career management, right? How do we ensure that we can earn what? Income? Can we have diversified income stream? What's the impact of our skills on our earning, and how do we improve our skill to be able to grow our career and improve our earnings? So that's it. How do we diversify our income stream? What you call multiple streams of income? How do we manage our various income stream and improve our and ensure that we have a sustainable earning capacity? Very important. Another thing is what? Budgeting and cash flow management. So we have financial planning and budgeting. How do we track income and expenses? How do we control our spending so that we do not go over the budget? And how do we allocate our money? Again, very important, establish financial priorities and allocate money to be able to ensure that these priorities are covered first before any other thing. Now, number 4, we have what? Savings and emergency planning. How do we have do we have emergency funds, and where do we need them? Where do we expect emergencies to happen? What portion of our income should we hold in what emergency funds, right? Short-term liquidity. Do we want to ensure that there is what? Should anything happen in the short run, we have somewhere to go to be able to ensure that we are not stuck, right? Unforeseen circumstances, unforeseen expenses should never catch us napping. In fact, that's a very important aspect of financial planning. Credit and debt management, right? So we want to ensure that we use debt or we use debt responsibly, debt and credit. And we've spoken about that, not making sure that we're investing in assets that appreciate and keeping a healthy or a good credit profile. How do we invest? Investment and wealth building. How do we allocate funds into investment assets? How do we manage the risk and return? In other words, how do we properly plan, gather knowledge, diversify, and ensure or protect ourselves against loss? How do we grow our net worth over time? Risk management, like I said, what are the major financial risks that we are exposed to in our business, in our investment? What is the risk to return rate? What are the assets we have invested in, and what is the risk? Are we overexposed? Very important. We want to use insurance to protect our investment, our income, and our assets, and make sure that we reduce exposure to major losses. And then ultimately, retirement planning, like we've spoken about, we want to make sure that we have a long-term plan, right, for accumulate income generation and income accumulation against the end of our lives, towards the end of our lives, when we may not be very strong and very active again, right? We want to make sure that we manage for inflation risk, because as time goes on, money loses its value. We also want to make sure that these investments are put in reliable places, not places where you go tomorrow and then the place has already packed up. Make sure that it's properly certified, it's properly regulated, and it's going to be there for the long run. Another reason why we undertake another area covered is what? Tax planning. What are your tax obligations? How can we be responsible in tax management? In other words, tax avoidance without what? Evasion, filing our taxes on time. However, we want to ensure that if there are loopholes for tax minimizations, we take them and we improve after tax returns. Again, planning how we're going to transfer our wealth and what cater to our dependents at the end of our lives. Ensure that there is what? Responsible and orderly distribution of assets, and then make sure that we have what? The right kind of behavior, right? In terms of money management, sound habits, things like what? Saving money, things like what? Knowing the amount you're going to give to charity and to causes that you value, right? Making sure that we are emotionally responsible at the time of spending. We don't spend on impulse or based on the heat of the emotions at the time. And how do we what? Improve financial literacy and discipline, always learning to be able to improve our financial position. And these are the key areas in personal finance. And we're going to go through a lot of these, if not all of these, over the course of this time. And I hope that you can be able to take the lessons you learn from these and apply them in a way that will significantly improve your financial performance, not just this year, 2026, but even beyond, up to retirement and what? And up to retirement and beyond, with respect to taking care of our responsibilities to our families and our dependents. Thank you very much for being a part of this class. We will be going off now and be joining you again with yet another interesting lesson. Now, before I go, I'm going to ask a question. We said that there are three motives for holding money, three reasons. The first is what you call transactional, the second is what we call precautionary, and the third is what we call speculative motive. The question I want to ask is, when you look at your income over a month, what percentage do you have in transaction? What percentage of your income do you currently hold as precautionary? What precautionary funds, and what amounts do you hold as speculative to be able to take advantage of opportunities, right? I want you to put down this as a note, right? And then you can also write down in the comment sections where you hope to improve your financial management, your personal financial planning and management, right at the comment section. Thank you very much for being a part of this training, and then I'll see you in our next video. But bye for now.